Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for our event, VFX Tips and Tricks Worth Sharing with our guest, Red Giant. My name is Myrna Harrington. I am the event coordinator here at Gnomon, and it is with great honor that I'll be introducing tonight's guest, Red Giant's Daniel Hashimoto. But before I introduce Daniel, a couple of things. Today's event is sponsored by Lenovo, so thank you as always to Lenovo for helping us bring these educational events to you from Gnomon. Another special thanks goes out to our industry partner, Wacom, for their support. With all that said, I'd like to now introduce tonight's guest. Daniel Hashimoto is Red Giant's senior content creator, and he's also the creator of Action Movie Kid YouTube channel. With that said, I'd like to now turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Hello, everybody. I am known as Hashi, the action movie dad online. I am part of Red Giant Maxon now, and I've had a very bizarre career. I have a very short attention span, which means that I'm always buzzing around and figuring out different things to do. And so I started out as a kid making goofy movies with a Betamax camera in my backyard, running around and making my brother and sister act in bizarre action scenes and the like. And then in junior high, I got my first copy of After Effects a little over 20 years ago now. And After Effects became this tentpole that led me through a lot of my life, and also became my, if I'm an expert in anything, it's After Effects, which I really love. And I'm going to talk about it a lot tonight. I'm very thankful to be here with Gnomon. I love everything that you guys do. You do some artistry that is super beautiful, and mine is going to pale a little bit in comparison. But I'm going to go ahead and run a reel of some of the visual effects work that I've been working on in recent years. Thank you so much. So a lot of that work came directly from Red Giant, the Red Giant's tutorial pages and our new short Darker Colors, which is really wonderful if you haven't seen it. But Red Giant is only my most recent muse for trying to figure out how to do creative things. Like I said earlier, I have a very short attention span, and that's, I think, because inspiration can come from anywhere. One of the ways that I spend my days is trolling around online and finding videos that I like this one of one of my heroes, Adam Savage, unfortunately taking a nosedive, data mosh, on his one wheel, which immediately got me thinking about this as a more exciting sequence. So this is a little sample of what I have always done. I love watching things and then trying to enhance them with visual effects. And this being a visual effects school, you guys are into creating worlds, and I'm into transforming our world into one that is somewhere in between. So I love doing things like this. If I ever see a video online, I have a hard time resisting adding my own take to it. Here's the much more plain original video for this one. In any case, all of this sort of came to an interesting boiling point while I was working at DreamWorks Animation. DreamWorks Animation was my home for 10 years. I was the head of the After Effects department, which was created around the idea that we could have a small team of After Effects people doing wonderful 2D sequences in-house at DreamWorks. And eventually we had 12 members. Some of them are still there today, and they do really wonderful work, especially any of the animatic sequences you'll see in the beginning of the Kung Fu Panda movies, or anytime there's a cartoon sequence, they had a hand in it. While I was there, I met my beautiful wife, Mandy, and had my first child, James. Working while having a kid was difficult, and balancing that life, it meant that I was gone from early in the morning to late at night, so I could basically say goodnight to my kid, and then he would disappear. But my wife would share all these cool stories about what he was up to and what he was interested in at the time, whether he was learning to walk or goofing off or had found a new toy or just seen a show or a movie that he was really inspired by. And that led me to shooting videos of my kid and posting them online just like everybody else does on Facebook. But I decided to add our own spin to them. So what that turned into ended up being this unexpected... Here's him hanging out with a friend, absolutely frozen, looking at a screen. Here's him eating some cereal.
Oh, sorry.
We went to Disneyland when it was still open. Caught the fireworks show up close.
It's kind of like a real gun.
Whoopsie. So all of these became this really unexpected viral success. I had posted a handful of videos online on YouTube so I could share them with my family who wasn't on Facebook at the time, and they would watch these YouTube links I would individually send them. One day, somebody on Reddit decided to share a whole bunch of them, and the channel got overwhelmed with views. And suddenly I was getting calls at work, and it became this whole other thing that ended up overwhelming me being able to have a full-time job at DreamWorks. So I ended up leaving there for the next 5 years, where I continued making videos with both of my kids, and we still continue to make goofy videos today. I obviously am here representing Red Giant and Maxon, and the reason why we found each other was I had learned After Effects and doing all of these little things from tutorials and online things that I had seen, the likes of Aaron Rabinowitz and Andrew Kramer and Seth Worley and Harry Frank teaching online about After Effects. And I love these people. I decided to send a thank you out to Aaron Rabinowitz, who ended up staying in contact with me over the years as this success built and as I left DreamWorks. And over the years, they courted and courted and courted me to come create content with them, which was a perfect fit because I love making movie effects and I love mimicking what I see on screen. So to that end, that is something that we are going to do today. Because I was worried that things may not have worked out, I pre-recorded me working at home doing this, but I'm not skipping any steps. I'm going to show you basically from start to finish the creation of one of these little adventures. So I was at home on St. Patrick's Day, which today is a few days ago. We were into our social distancing and staying at home, which is a very challenging time for parents, but can be a wonderful time for creative people to try to flex a few muscles. The kids were doing PE at home, which was just a handful of exercises they were required to do by themselves. And it got me thinking of a little scenario where they were doing some of their exercises and maybe were joined by a giant creature or a giant robot or something jumping along with them. So I will take you through the creation of a little video, and we're going to try to complete it here today. So I start out with this piece of footage where I remarkably remembered to put down tracking markers on the floor. We have James and Sophia, my two children. They're doing a little exercise with these stools, jumping up and down on them. And then the camera pans around to reveal this little spot. So I'm going to crop down this video to exactly the little bit that I need and create a pre-comp out of it. That means I have just this nice little piece of footage. Now, right around here is where we're going to start revealing a creature that I want to add into this scene. So we're going to talk a little bit about motion tracking. I'm going to split this clip in After Effects right around the first instance where you might be able to see this monster coming into frame. So I'll split it off there, and I'm going to try tracking the camera with After Effects built-in camera tracker. Now here at this school, you guys create wonderful computer-generated assets, and what I love doing is figuring out ways to blend computer-generated assets with home video. I really like the aesthetic of it because it's surprising to people. It's usually handheld, it's a little bit bizarre, it's layered up, and sometimes feels more real. So now that the camera tracker has run, After Effects has given me a bunch of little tracked points. If I turn up the point size, you can see kind of where it's positioned some of them. Now there's a bunch of garbage data, like with the kids jumping in the foreground, they're not to be tracked. But using some of After Effects tools, I can lasso a handful of the points that did get tracked and tell it to set this as the ground plane and origin, and to create a solid and a camera that moves around that solid. Now this is not bad, but I noticed that as I scrub through, that plane is really drifting. And for any of you who have worked on visual effects shots where you need a camera track and have used a program like After Effects, you've probably had this kind of frustrating result before. So the next step I had was to use a garbage mat to try to assist me in tracking. I did that by creating a solid, which I'll make just a little bit transparent. And then I can go through and try to draw just a garbage mat, I'm sure you all know what that is, around the children to block them out from being something that is distracting to the camera's algorithm. So I'll draw a simple little shape around Sophia. It doesn't need to be exact. And then as I scrub through the timeline, I just move this little obscuration shape to be in front of her. It's really exciting stuff. But as we do this, this will block out whole sections of the image that the computer will know to ignore when it's trying to figure out and triangulate where the camera is supposed to be. And because I'm showing this from start to finish, you'll get to see all of my mistakes along with this, which is really fun as well. So I'm going to finish tracking out a garbage mat for James here. Make sure that Sophia's mat is sort of still blocking her out all the way through the trackable section of footage. And that James' garbage mat is helping with a section where he is visible. I'll go ahead and jump a little bit forward where I've turned on that garbage mask, pre-comped this area, or pre-comped those two layers, and then run the camera tracker on them. I'm going to uncheck the auto-delete points across time just so I can see what the tracker is trying to track here. And once that's done, I'll see that I again have a bunch of points being tracked. I can turn up the size of them. But I don't have a whole lot of points on the ground. It really understood where the fireplace was, but the ground didn't have a lot of detail. But let's try it anyway. We will set the ground plane and origin here and create a solid in camera like this. And immediately, as I roll the camera back, I can see that plane isn't at all married to the ground. Now, working with iPhone footage shot in an impromptu fashion all the time often leads me to a situation like this, where you have really difficult to work with footage. So I'm going to show you one more trick that I often end up using in my Action Movie Kit videos, which is to do motion tracking with the mats in place and also enhancing part of the image so it'll hopefully be more informative to the computer trying to track the geometry of the ground. So for this, I'm adding an adjustment layer with some brightness and contrast, the legacy version, and just cranking it to be this really ugly, dirty carpet, really bringing out the natural stains that we have in our carpet that I'm now sharing with the world. But what's wonderful about this process is that it creates a bunch of data for the camera tracker to try to go with. I'll create a few loose keyframes. This doesn't take very long to do. But you can see that this ground plane looks really textured and is really interesting now. And now from this point, I'll be able to run that camera tracker again and see what we can get. So I'm jumping over to where that previous camera tracker was. I'm going to delete the camera and the solid we created from it and reanalyze the scene, leaving all of my settings intact. So now I have a lot of points that got tracked on the ground, which is really wonderful for this kind of a shot. So I'm going to do what I've tried twice before and failed at, which is selecting this bunch of the ground, setting the ground, plane, and origin, creating a solid and camera, and let's see how this works. Scrubbing through, I can see that I finally, for the first time, have a nice plane that stays right where it's supposed to through this whole very long shot. Having this tracked is my first step on creating a full scene that I can integrate 3D objects into. I have a ground plane defined, and using After Effects plane creation tools, I can select 3 of these points and put in some stand-in solids near the fireplace, near the couch, and I can also scrub through to the end here, and just in case, I can select any of these points and create null locators that will help me define where we are, in case I need them later. And I really like how this final attempt at the camera track turned out. I find that a handheld camera lends bizarrely to the realism of a VFX shot just because you're not used to, or at least until the last 10 years, you weren't as used to seeing handheld visual effects shots. I should maybe revise that to 20 years. We've been doing it for a while. I'm now going to do a process in After Effects which I find very helpful, and I call it normalizing your 3D space. I'll take that solid that I had originally tracked and set as the ground plane, and I'm going to align it with the directions and the vectors of the room. And then I'll move it down to the bottom here, and I'm going to parent all of my 3D locators, including the camera, to the ground. This is a really important and helpful step. On the position of the ground, I'm going to change its position to 960 by 540 by 0, which is the exact middle of an HD comp if you're working with that. If you're working in 4K, you should have that and put it there. And the orientation should be set at 270 by 0 by 0. By doing this with all of these layers parented, it's reoriented all of the camera tracking data, all of the locator data, and put them in a nice spot. I'm now creating a black solid, which I'll just call the dummy solid. I'm going to convert it to a 3D layer, and you'll see that now it creates a nice 3D shape right in the middle of my scene. By adjusting the scale of my ground plane with the camera attached, I can try to get to a good point where an HD solid is filling a lot of frame. It's not too small and it's not too gigantic. Because After Effects has no idea what scale this footage is, it's important to do this so if I bring in stock elements later or try to line up 3D objects later, they'll always be starting out right in the middle of this ground plane and also facing the correct direction for this ground plane. I can show you a quick example of that. by turning off all of the little extra adjustment layers and masks, you can see that I have some nice tracked objects in the scene. Sophia coming and looking down into what will eventually become a hole in the ground. A quick example of what this normalized workspace is like. Let's see, here we go. Oops, pardon me. Here we go. If I create a text layer and make it 3D, it'll appear right here in the middle, which is great, and it feels aligned with the world. And I plan to do that with my 3D objects as well. Now, this is an amazing school that creates most of their 3D stuff from scratch and through genuine artistry, and I'm going to do the exact opposite, which is finding stuff online and mushing it together for my purposes here, because I'd like to do something very quick and dirty. So I'm going to use an awesome site that Adobe hosts called Mixamo. Now, if you're not familiar with Mixamo, or if you loathe it or whatever, it is a collection of wonderful CG characters, tons of them right here, and you can scroll through and choose any one of them, and then you can apply different animations to them, like this cool rifle punch, or maybe a little capoeira, rota. And if I search for aerobics, I find this one called box jump, which is actually what I had my kids mimicking earlier. This library is pretty great. Now, this character won't do, so I'm going to go over to the characters selection and look through for something big. I'd like something heavy enough that it shouldn't be doing this exercise with them, and I'm going to settle on this mutant. He's a classic Mixamo character. Over here we have a bunch of settings, like they've thought about a character arm space setting, which, as you see, if I drag that out, it widens his arms and so they're not intersecting his body, which is very clever, I think. They also have this overdrive setting, which is effectively the speed. So if you wanted him to be this gargantuan beast, you could turn it all the way down, but I just want him to be slightly slower than a human-sized figure, just so we can feel his weight a little bit. Once we've done that, Mixamo allows you to just download an animated FBX file that will include his geometry, his textures, and this animation baked onto the FBX, which I think is stellar. The next thing I shopped for on Mixamo was a falling action. I really like this losing your balance and falling into a swimming pool action, so I'm going to download that one as well. Once I've downloaded these FBX files, I can move them into Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D is my choice of 3D program. This is even before Maxon decided to work with Red Giant. But I'm going to go ahead and open up our first FBX file of that box jump. And here we go. We got the nice character, his textures came along with him, which is wonderful, and he's a beautiful animated and rigged skeleton up here. We've got his mesh and we've got his skeleton animation, which is beautiful. So, I would like him to do this action several times, and right now he's actually just doing one iteration of it. So I'll add some frames to my comp here, drag out the timeline a little bit, and then I will select everything. I will select everything. I think it's just catching up with me. All right, and if I hold down Control and drag all of these keyframes, I'm duplicating them over, and I think I can snap it right there in place. And I can do this process twice, so the monster is perfect. We're right there. I can do this process twice, so the monster will do 3 jumps up onto that box, And then in the middle of the third one, I want him to burst down through the floor and create a bunch of chaos. The not-so-secret formula to all of my videos is that they devolve into chaos. All right, so we've got all of the keyframes copied from this one looping action. That was an easy way to do that, which is really nice. So he does this 3 times, and on the third one, I want him to transition to falling down, like that falling from a swimming pool bit that we just saw. Now, that isn't going to be as easy as copying keyframes over. I'm going to actually use something a little bit different. So I'll quickly group off this jumping up monster, call him that, and then I'm going to merge this whole file with the animated FBX of the falling into the pool action. I don't want to reassign the takes, I just want to bring in this new mutant as he is. So we've got a mutant falling now, and we have a mutant jumping. Now what I can do to help put these guys into the same skeleton is I can group off this falling action. Let's call this a pool fall. And now I'm going to select my jumping group, and I'm going to go to Animate, Add Motion Clip. I'm going to leave these default settings, which is going to turn this animation into a little motion clip that can be applied to a skeleton. I'll keep all of that intact. We'll say OK. And then down here, actually if I select the pool fall, I can do the same thing. I'll add a motion clip to that. Let's call it fall. Great. Now over here, I can click on these little tags right here. And I can say reveal in the timeline. Now I have my jumping animation laid out on the timeline just as a simple representation, which is really cool. And over here to the left, you can see that my fall animation is there too. I'm scrubbing to the point that I would like my monster to fall through the box. So that's around frame 280, something like that. And then I'm going to drag in my fall animation right to this same timeline, which is pretty cool. So there you see I have the jumping animation on the left, the fall animation on the right. Now you can overlap these like this, and Cinema will try to combine and blend together the two animations you have. By holding Control and dragging the end of this clip, I can clip off the rest of the monster's jump to end right there. And now I can grab my falling animation and drag it to overlap. You can see it puts in a little curve right there to show what frames it's blending together. And if I hide my original pool fall guy, you can see this animation now on just one character. So right here, he's going to try to transition between that jumping pose and down into the fall animation, where he loses his balance and falls through. Now, the animations are positioned at some different spots, and I didn't think to fix that ahead of time, but the transition in body poses is actually pretty good. So the next thing that I'm going to do once I have these two working nicely together is figure out a way to get this cinema animation into After Effects. Now, as I admitted before, I'm an After Effects expert. I am a novice when it comes to 3D stuff, which may be embarrassing to be teaching at a school that is amazing at 3D stuff. But I'm going to show you how I overcome that by using a few little tricks. So, I'm going to try to figure out how to get this animation of my monster jumping twice onto the box and the third time falling through the floor into After Effects, where I can do the rendering there. And to do that, I'm going to use an amazing extension called the File Sequence Exporter. Now, I got this online from, not AE Scripts, through, oh, I'm blanking now. VideoHive. I can assign a folder and have Cinema 4D export, we'll call them monster, every single one of these frames as a Cinema 4D file. I'll say the active objects only, and I'll make sure that my jumping skeleton mesh is the one that is selected. There we go. And I'll go ahead and export this. We can fast forward a bit. Export finished. Now what's beautiful about this is now I have something that will work in After Effects for me. So here we go. We went from Mixamo to Cinema 4D, and now we're back in After Effects where I feel comfortable again. I'm going to add a new solid, and then I'm going to pull out one of my very favorite plugins ever created, Element 3D. Now, Element 3D is a 3D interface and basically a whole system that works within After Effects. So it's by Video Copilot. I'm going to open Element here. All right. Now, Element allows me to go to a scene setup where it has its own unique interface. It's using the GPU to render this stuff. And in here, I can import a 3D sequence. Let's see. Let's find, whoops. All right, my sequence of files right here. We'll import that, check to load the material, and it looks like everything worked out great. Because it says 361 frames there to the side, that means that this worked out. And down here, I can drag through the frames of the animation to make sure that everything came in properly, right here under Baked Animation. Wonderful. And now this animation is kind of neat. It has him jumping up onto this box. The textures look a little bit weird because the normal bump came in a little bit too high, and also a lot of the time these models end up with this built-in glossiness that is too high. So this one only came with a diffuse and a normal bump from Mixamo, but they'll work just fine for me. I'm going to turn the glossiness of this character way down because that's silly. Wonderful. So he looks all right. There he is with his full res textures. Now, what he's doing is he's jumping up onto a box. The kids have their own stool in the original footage. He does not. So I'm going to find a frame where he's jumped up onto a box, and I want to slide something in there. So I'm going to do something really simple, which is going over to Sketchfab, a wonderful resource for 3D models, and search for downloadable wooden boxes. There are several pretty great options. I really kind of like this, these long crates. They look a little bit like, you know, like a yoga or exercise shape that you could jump onto. So I like this one. It is made by Blender 3D, who is releasing this under Creative Commons Attribution, which is wonderful of him to do, or her. And I can go ahead right back over to Element and import this model that I just downloaded. Remap the textures to it. It looks like this one came in with a few more things. Some roughness, normal maps, specular, etc. I won't let you watch me link up all those textures. But ultimately, we do the very obvious thing of trying to make this box line up with where this beast is jumping. There we go. His toe's going through that a little bit, so I got to do a little shift right there. Great. So now we've got a monster and a box. And I would actually like to break these guys into some different groups so I can have separate control over them in After Effects. The way that Element works is it has little folders that can be modified on the outside. So if I create a group 1, a group 2, and a group 3 folder, I can put my monster in group 1, I'll put a crate in group 2, and then in group 3, I'm going to add a plane. This plane isn't going to really be part of the render, but it's going to be necessary. What I'm going to do with it is I'm going to go to the texture, and down here, under the advanced settings, I can tell this to be a matte shadow surface. Any of you who have ever done compositing of 3D objects has probably worked with invisible objects that can still catch ambient occlusion and shadows, and that's exactly what this kind of texture is going to do. So I'll say OK to all of that, and we'll jump back into After Effects, and boom! Got my teeny tiny monster. It's very cute. And you'll see from that normalizing of the 3D scene that he's landed right in the middle of the scene like he's supposed to, which is great. I'm just going to double check that I have all of the animation included. It looks like I do. All right. So now for each of these, group 1, group 2, and group 3, I'm going to go and create a null object. These null locators are really wonderful, and they allow me to take nulls and move them around to affect where these 3D objects are positioned within my After Effects world space, which is really wonderful. I'm going to rename them quickly so we can know what they're doing. We've got a ground null, we've got this box null, and last we've got our monster null. Now, I'd like to be able to modify all of these together in a way, so I'm going to link the box null and the monster null to my ground null, so I can rotate it around. Whoopsie, I undid one level too big. Anyway, so I can now move that ground null around, and it'll move everything with it. I'll find a scale that feels appropriate for this ginormous monster doing aerobics with my kids during the quarantine PE class. And here we go. Already, even though he's not motion blurred or blended in nicely or anything like that, this handheld camera track makes this animation feel a lot more part of the world than a static shot might. Now, looking at this setup, he's bursting through the ground a little bit too late. So I'm going to dive in to group 1, where under the baked animation rollout, I can add a frame offset. I'm going to try to offset it by about 50 frames and see what happens here. So now if we play through, he jumps up and crashes through the floor right around there. That feels timed pretty well. It might be a little bit late, so I'm going to try adjusting the frame offset to a little bit lower maybe. Let's see. This is where he's supposed to fall. Sophia and James are still looking over at me, so that's too early for him to fall, I think, so let's move it back a bit. So he's still about to crash, and see how this looks. 30 frame offset means that he crashes, and Sophia and James are looking over, and that feels just a hair too early. So let's try 40. Sophia and the monster jump at about the same time, and the crash animation happens at about the same time. All right, so this is starting to get blocked out appropriately. I'm not that concerned with the look yet. I'm really more concerned with the timing. So because I've created those amazing box nulls and monster null, it means that I can now add keyframes to their position and orientation to try to kind of compensate for that bad transition between the two types of animation for the monster. He hovers up into the air, and I'm going to try to overcome that by having his whole model move down the entire time. And that feels like a nice crush through the ground speed. Now we've got this box that's just hanging out. And I would like to add some keyframes to that box too. Let's turn off some of these other distracting little bits. All right, there we go. All right. I'm going to cut off this 3D layer right there where they disappear, and we're going to add some keyframes to the box's position and orientation. So right as he steps on it right here and it starts to move down, the box will start to push down through this invisible ground plane. And let's add some really rudimentary, minimal keyframes. One of the biggest parts of my process is always hoping to minimize the number of keyframes and manual things that I need to do by relying on the tools and their amazing built-in capabilities. So you can see right here, even just a few simple keyframes here are allowing that to feel more like what I'm hoping for. This big monster, trying to do these workouts with the kids, but he was definitely too heavy for this room and falls into the invisible ground. Wonderful. So I think we're in a pretty good space with this, and I think it's a great time for me to introduce you to one of my favorite tools. Now, you'll notice that right here on the screen, my tracking markers are visible. Obviously, there are a lot of them. There's the whole box worth of them. But this one under his foot is really, really visible. You know what? I talked out of turn. I forgot that what I did first was I added Real Smart Motion Blur to this monster. Real Smart Motion Blur is a motion vector-based motion blur generator. And I'll add it, and I'll actually try to crank it up. And so his blur level is similar to that of Sophia, who's moving. It's pretty drastic because it's on this shot on this iPhone. There's a ton of motion blur. But if I add that in, he'll look just that much more realistic. And that little way that I pulled up that plugin, by the way, was a free download you can get from Video Copilot called FX Console. It's a quicker way to pull up individual effects from After Effects. Anyway, wonderful. He's motion blurred and looks even more like part of the scene, even though his lighting is still kind of goofy. Let's jump forward a little bit. In fact, why don't we try to do a little time lapse of adding in some lights. Element reacts to comp lights, which is really great. I can add in After Effects lights, and they'll begin to light up this monster as if he were more married to the scene. There are much more advanced ways to do this when you're working in full 3D, but when we're trying to work in a short amount of time, this is a pretty great way to do it. I'm going to add a little bit of ambient occlusion, sampled from this darkest color of the carpet. I'll add in a little bit of ambient glow from the room. And this monster isn't going to look perfect for a while, and that's because I'm saving one of my favorite tools for the very end of this process. So I just want him to be lit generally properly, even if he's not as integrated as he could be. We're going to do our integration at the very end. Little backlight to kind of match that window back there. And you get the idea. You're students of Gnomon. You know lighting better than I could approximate in this tutorial. So here's about where we've ended up. We have monster jumping, falling through floor. Wonderful. But there's this tracking marker that's been bugging me because it's visible the whole time that he's doing his exercise routine. And that's a very common thing that people need to deal with when you're doing visual effects. You end up with tracking markers all over the place. They end up being more of a pain to remove than they might have even been helpful in the first place. But luckily, there's a really amazing tool that is available for this, and I'm really excited to show it off to you. So that's the little tracking marker that is the thorn in our side right now. And I'm going to solo just the video layer now. And I'm going to apply an amazing little plugin called Spot Clone Tracker. It's part of Red Giant's new VFX suite, and it is just delightful. Check this out. So this little circle over here is a sample point, and this little circle that I'm dragging right now is the clone to spot. So it's a clone stamp. Very simple. It's stamping this area from this blue circle into this little orangey yellow circle. I'm colorblind, by the way, I should mention, so I'll get a few things wrong here every now and then. But this tool allows you to create the shape of a spot that you're trying to replace and a sample point. And one of the things that's interesting about this is it's not just straight cloning the area, it's also color matching the new location. You can see this is a darker section of carpet, but no matter where I drag this, it's actually just copying over the texture values. Like if I drag it here, it's trying to copy over the texture of that grate, or here it's the texture of the couch, but it's using the native colors from where the spot is, which I think is radical. So anyway, I'll pick a spot kind of nearby that has some similar carpet texture to what I like. Yeah, right there. So what's the big deal? This is going to still be a pain in the butt to do, you'd think. However, Spot Clone Tracker comes with a built-in tracker. So if I press play forward on the track, this is the track running in real time. It's so fast that the display adapters in After Effects are not refreshing the screen. You can see that little dot moving around. And what it's doing, if I were to stop it for a second here, is it has gone through and created keyframes for the position of that tracking marker. I can keep it tracking forward. It'll start moving all the way through the comp, which is great. It'll automatically stop if it runs into a spot that it's not sure what to do. But let me just scrub through what it's done. We've tracked that spot on the ground, and the relative clone sample spot has moved along with it, all the way through here, all the way to this spot here. We're starting to get into some trouble, which is why the tracker stopped. Luckily, I can keyframe some things like the spot opacity right here, so I can have the clone stamp turn off. I can animate or keyframe any of the properties of this. And if I fast forward just a little bit, you'll see that I'm able to track that spot forward, track that spot backward, even through the end of this shot here. We track it all the way through. And right here, it's tracking, the sample point is tracking off the edge of screen, so I can animate that to be somewhere else over time. But what this does is it allows me to track a spot and remove it from my footage in minutes instead of a complicated long setup. And it does an amazing job. Let's play that through. So look at this. I've removed this one spot that was visible during the monster's animation, which is really helpful. Almost all of those other spots are going to be covered up by other stuff going on. You can see me flicking it on and off right there. There he goes, and it's gone. All right, moving forward, back on Sketchfab, I was able to find this amazing explosion hole model by Gianarpan. And I can import that into Element 3D, just like I did with my previous stuff. And I can, I'll scale it down a little bit, and I can texture it up with an image that I took of the carpet in that room. I'll mess with the material settings a little bit, but ultimately what I'll do is I'm going to place this torn-looking carpet section to kind of be in the spot where the monster's falling through. I'm doing this torn carpet on its own layer because I think I'm going to try modifying the color by sampling the colors around it instead of having to modify the monster's colors too. Right now I'm just trying to get the right spot for this hole to be. And you'll see as I scale that through, I can actually animate it to go from 0 Y scale to its 100% Y scale as the monster falls through. And there's a very dirty edge going on right there between the monster and this hole in the carpet he's falling through. He's not falling through it in true 3D space. I could set that up, but it would be a little bit more work, and I would rather work quickly than properly. So back in Element, I am adding in this occlusion layer, just a big torus really that I'm going to make into a matte shadow, though not really a matte shadow, more of a matte alpha because it's not going to receive ambient occlusion or the shadows from the scene. But what it will do is it'll block out anything that goes under it like that. Then I'm going to try to build in this hole using some of the pre-loaded models that come with Element. I'm going to use this billboard because it looks like a bunch of boards, which is great. And if I turn off the posters from it, I can just drag this whole billboard down into the ground. And if I rotate it around, and you kind of can't really see the rest of the billboard, it just looks like some random boards or something like that. Scale it up and move it down. And you can see that basically above the carpet you could see all of the billboard, but below you can only see through the hole. That's what that torus is doing. Now I can scroll through and try to find, I'm going to use one of these seamless backdrop objects from Video Copilot as well. It's just this little cyc, or not a cyc, but this is like the corner of a room or something like that. And I can drag that below this hole right here. And I can texture it up with maybe more of a concrete or stone kind of texture. A bunch come with Element, and there are a handful that you can purchase separately. Here's kind of a concrete little texture. That looks a little bit like the weird foundation or inside of a house or something like that. That all fits nicely there inside that hole. So if I come back to here, it looks like I didn't align it incredibly well. But we have a carpet torn and this weird hole shape behind it. It looks like I kind of put that stuff all a little bit too low, so I'm going to raise it up a little bit. Beautiful. Line that up. Kind of adjust this wood so it looks like it's maybe wood kind of buried into some cement foundation of a house, which is sort of what's under there for real anyway. And now when I play these two things together, I'm getting this interesting kind of combination of this monster disappearing into his floor at the same time of this hole appearing, which is kind of cool. I'm going to spare you some of the details, but because I feel like these 3D assets are close enough, I'm going to render them out as PNG sequences, and so I can simplify this whole comp down to something that I'm going to now show you live. So, if this all works, I'm remoting into my desktop back home, where I've now simplified this comp into 3 layers. We have my monster jumping up and down here. Sorry for the image quality there. I think it will adapt as we move on. Let me see here. Let's optimize the quality. Beautiful. All right, so as we scrub through this, you can see that I have a monster I have a hole, and I have the kids. So obviously there's going to be an issue right here where we come around and you can see that Sophia is supposed to be in front of this hole. That's going to require some roto business, and I don't want to bore you guys too much with that, but I will show you how I would normally work with a situation like this. I'll duplicate her video layer, move it up above all of those layers. Oh, there we got our spot clone. I'll delete that for the moment. And let's just do a simple color range on this carpet value for now. There we go. That should be enough for the moment. And maybe we'll add a little bit of a matte choker just so this her body is being keyed out a little bit nicely. Now, do a little garbage matte. And just like before, now I have this this really roughly keyed out Sophia. Obviously, we'll go into more detail before we get to a final comp, but this will allow us to approach what I need for final now. So everyone ignore what she looks like. She's going to look a little bit bungled for now. But one of the wonderful tools in After Effects that would allow me to deal with this really easily is the RotoBrush tools. She's wearing really distinct, bright colors that RotoBrush will be able to grab onto wonderfully. Watching people rotoscope is one of the most fun aspects of visual effects tutorials. Beautiful. I'll turn her on right around there. Let's see. Oh, my keyboard shortcuts aren't sending through this. All right. Here we go. So just to give you a general idea of what the section will look like is we've got a monster that is not crazy well integrated into this system, jumping through the floor and crashing into it. It's pretty cool. It's got a lot of the motion and everything that we want, but it doesn't have many of the effects that would make this a little bit more believable. For starters, we've got a lot of issues with the way this CG character looks in relationship to the other characters. He's not very well matched or balanced in anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw these 4 remaining layers into one of my favorite new effects that Red Giant offers, and that is the effect called Super Comp. Super Comp is the baby of Stu Maschwitz, who is an incredible, don't know what that warning was, who's this very brilliant mind who has composited on movies through the years, starting with some amazing work in the they're in the Rebel Mac unit at ILM on some cool things like Men in Black and some others. I'm going to throw all of my layers into this plugin that he created called SuperComp. And what SuperComp does is it's its own compositing environment that is bringing in, let's see, it's missing the hole. This is a very terrible demo of my software. Let's see what I did here. I feel like I am missing my layer. It knows it's there. There we go. Sorry, I just didn't click on it to acknowledge its presence. Anyway, SuperComp is its own compositing environment. So if you can see, I can solo this top layer, SuperComp, and it is rendering the monster, the keyed out Sophia, the whole layer, or it's supposed to be compositing the whole layer. Oh, it doesn't exist on those frames. My apologies. And putting them together. Now, what is neat about this is in an environment like this, I can tell SuperComp to have my monster be integrated into this scene using a combination of techniques that are common to compositing. But instead of applying them individually, they are all available immediately within the SuperComp interface. Things like edge erodes, edge blends, blurring behind, haze, volume fog, light wrap, and things like that. For this, I can tell that I'm going to want some light wrap. So when this monster is back in front of this window, I get a hint that the window's light and the bright areas of the couch are wrapping around him. You have settings for all these things, so I can turn this up to a very high degree, exaggerated degree here. So now the background colors are wrapping around him. And the reason that SuperComp is different than other things that you've seen is that it's not trying to source just one layer. It is sourcing anything behind it to create this light wrap. So, for example, when I get down to this area where there is a hole in the ground, if there weren't a hole, the light wrap would source this carpet. If the hole is present, the light wrap sources these darker colors of the ground here. Now, for years in After Effects, we've figured out our own systems of pre-comping to make sure that our background layer and light wraps get to reference each other, but SuperComp takes all of those things and combines them into one simple interface, where I can have this hole behind or in front of things, and the light wrap of each of the layers above it will react accordingly. So I'm going to add in a little bit of haze over this character. It's obviously not really a foggy scene, but what that does is it blends in some of these background colors over him to try to match his black levels a little bit more. I'm going to turn the amount way down to just a very subtle amount and the size a little bit up. Almost imperceptible what it's doing there, but it just fills him in a little bit the same way they have some ambient light. If the color correction on him feels a little bit off, I can go right to a mini version of Magic Bullet's Colorista, which is built right into SuperComp. So I can do things like adjust the black levels, try to maybe bring down his mids a bit. I'm going to do the quick Hashi version of color correction, which is going to look all right, but not as good as someone who is not colorblind. One of the reasons why my wife is spectacular is that she can actually see extra colors. I am colorblind, and we often work together and have since we worked at DreamWorks. I'm flying solo without her tonight, so this is going to look maybe a little wonkier than I prefer. I'm going to desaturate him a little bit too. Let's turn down that crazy amount of light wrap. It looks like my monster is a little bit semi-transparent from one of the things that I had done, but no matter. I can add any effects that I want to back to the original layers. Like I can add maybe a simple choker that adds back a little bit of his alpha. Yeah, it looks like some of his alpha was getting lost when I masked out him from the ground earlier. So I can put that back in there. It makes some of these edges a little bit more harsh. So I can jump to his layer back in SuperComp and maybe add a little bit of reverse light wrap, which is basically his colors bleeding out onto the side, kind of a fake ambient occlusion situation. I'll just try the default for that. And I'm going to add an edge blend, which will hopefully soften some of these edges. He's been over color corrected for sure, so I apologize. Here we are. All right, hopefully we're starting to get the idea. I'm going to turn down the light wrap amount, which I had at an insane level before. I'm going to add another copy of light wrap, which I will use instead of in a normal mode. I'm going to use it for color. I'm going to make the size a little bit larger and have it blend in some of the colors into his layer. Oopsie. I apologize for this remote setup. I feel like I'm not getting as fine a handle on this color correction as I wish I were. All right, I'm going to move on. My color correction on the monster is not phenomenal right now, but one of the other glaringly bad parts of this composite right now is this weird section where the box just kind of flies through the floor. You can see some tracking markers for a second, and there's actually not a very good way that the monster falls through the hole. But the reason I know that's all going to be okay is because I use stock elements like super glue and duct tape all the time. So I'm going to quickly go through a cool library of some crazy dust hits and dust waves that I have from over these years. There's an exciting one. Could look like a burst through the floor. There's this wonderful powder hit from Action Essentials by Video Copilot that is just kind of a burst of particles all at once. That one's a fun one too. And I'm going to just layer these in to this comp a little bit to obscure this horrible job I've got going on here. And surprisingly, in the Action Movie Kid world and in the world of quick turnaround for Twitter laugh kind of verse, this kind of system has worked out really well for me. So I'll throw in this little powder hit. I'm going to disable SuperComp for just a second and kind of look at my original layers. This powder hit should happen right around here. I know this doesn't make any sense, but in visual effects, everything is covered in dust as soon as it needs to move. So roughly, I'm going to be adding in something that looks like that. Wonderful. So I'm going to turn this into a 3D layer. I'm going to have it ignore the lights. I pressed A twice to reveal the properties of this, so it's not going to accept lights anymore. And rotate this around a little bit, place it right here, and maybe I'll add a little bit of a mask. So it kind of moves upward more than downward. Feather that out. All right, so there's one bit of obscuration here. Let's see. Since that anchor point is pretty close to where the explosion happens, I'm going to scale it up. Oh, too much. And now this isn't actually going to be a little explosion or a charge or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and just tone it a different color with a CC toner. I'm going to tone it to be kind of this, sort of this carpet realm. Its brightest color, I'll say, is maybe more like these brightest colors here. So it just blends into this carpet color a little bit more. Now, who knows what this is, but what'll be fun about it is that when this all plays back, oops, we're skipping frames. Let me switch back to speed. I'm just going to focus on this little realm right here. jump onto the box, have a bunch of mist shoot up right at that moment. That starts to obscure it a little bit. Obviously, this box is kind of doing this weird thing where it's going through the hole at the wrong spot. All right, so we've got that impact mark in. Let's duplicate that layer, and I'm going to throw in one of these dust hits. We'll try dust wave number 5. He's a popular one. All right. I'm going to press Y so I can pan my layer behind a little bit. Move the anchor point down. Move the mask down a bit. Let's get more of this layer visible in here. All right, this is a big old dust hit like that. I'm going to make it more visible by going to its curves and boosting the alpha curve a little bit. As I do that, I think as I scroll through, what it should look like is kind of a big puff in front of him. Let's see. How big is this layer? Down to there. Great. Drag these down behind Sophia. All right. Huge unmotivated dust, a signature of action movie kid videos, and also any poor compositing out there, which is what I'm really doing right now. All right, let's see if that'll play back at any kind of reasonable speed. All right, so there's a weird little jump with the box there. I think it's because I didn't make my hole go forward far enough, but we're trying to work quickly here. This is the way these layers combine when they're just laid over top of each other. But if I go back to SuperComp, I can try to add in these dust layers in a more integrated way. First, I'm going to pre-compose these two. I'm going to move them all into here, and let's call them the dust stuff. And then in SuperComp, I can simply add any new layer anytime that I want. I'm going to bring them in here, and I'm going to put them behind this video layer, which is really Sophia. Maybe I'll rename that so I remember what it is. All this dust stuff. Now, one of the cool features that I really like here, whoops, let me pre-collapse that layer. Oops, let me pre-collapse the dust stuff layer. There we go. Now it's two 3D layers in that other comp, but they're getting reacting to the camera because of that. Now they'll be a little bit brighter here and obscure a lot of that front edge of the box when this moment happens. And one of the cool things that you can do in SuperComp is this dust, instead of just laying on top of everything, is I could add a blur behind effect, which if you see here, as I turn that up, turn it on and off. It can blur little bits behind it, like right here. I can turn up the amount even higher to exaggerate this a little bit more there. So what's fun about SuperComp is it does these cool things that are compositing tricks that I would normally have to make a duplicate of the dust stuff, make it an adjustment layer, try to blur out the background a little bit behind where it's happening. But all of that can be encompassed by this one little node right here. And that's not even to mention all of the wonderful presets that come. Like I can try a foggy integration to this layer to see what it looks like. Or I can modify something like this with its own blur behind and all of that haze, trying to blend in colors from the rest of the scene into where it is. And what's nice about this layer, again, is that it's aware of and blurring anything behind it, which is really cool. And my Sophia holdout layer, let me go ahead and just add back in a little bit more of her layer. You'll notice that I'm working back and forth between SuperComp and the original layers with ease, which is really nice. SuperComp is aware of all the transformations that I make to any of these layers in the background. And even though I'm moving this layer way down here, it's actually getting composited up in SuperComp, which is great. So let's take one more look at where we've landed so far. I think the worst thing that turned out here was my monsters integration. Let me go ahead and delete some of what's going on here. I'm just going to clear all effects, go back to where we were. And I think that my trying to unchoke the mat from the monster was what really did me in here. He's semi-transparent, which is my fault from when I tried to pre-render him and save some time. But we're going to go ahead and try to put a little bit of his alpha back, but not make those edges look so horrendous. Apologies, user error could happen to anyone. All right, let's use one of the presets for for maybe trying to match the black levels. No, that's too much. I can actually preview any of these effects individually up here as I scroll over them. Let's try a subtle double wrap on him. I think that'll be enough just to make sure that he's getting some cool overlay from the background. All right. We're getting pretty close now. Right at this moment when he falls through the floor, I'm also going to use a cheap compositor trick as well, which is some camera shake. But instead of trying to pre-comp everything and add my own motion blur and some keyframes to something, I'm going to simply add in an adjustment layer on the very top, put it right up here. And in fact, the only layer I need is my SuperComp layer. So I'll just solo that in my adjustment layer. And then we'll add in some camera shake from Universe right here. I can go to choose a preset. Let's see. So we've got all sorts. We've got like a steady boat weave kind of one, a car mount, which is really great for just adding a bit of life to your scene. It's bouncing up and down really quickly. There's earthquake, which is kind of crazy, handheld. Anyway, I'm going to try to go with car mount because it's a great amount of fast up and down shake. And I'm going to add some keyframes to it. So once again, we have our adjustment layer that is some camera shake. I love this giant keyboard up here. We're going to add some keyframes to the master amount right here where he's going to start bursting through the ground there. It looks like this dust comes on a little early, so I'm going to find that layer and maybe move it back a little bit. Oh, it's in the pre-comp. So let's, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to time remap this. I like it being that big there, but I want it to not be visible yet. There we go. Very silly. All right, in a final comp of this, what I would do is try to throw in some more debris and actually fix this front area of the box a little bit. But for right now, we'll get back to fixing this camera shake, which I will turn to 0 here. It'll ramp right up to 100% right at the moment that box starts to break through the ground there. And then by the time he's landed, it can settle back down to 0 again. I love to do this a lot of the times with comps because it adds this top level camera shake to everything, which distracts from bad compositing. You can even tell the motion blur to turn on. I can turn on to a medium amount right here, so by the time we're to here, everything in frame is kind of shaking around. The frequency is high. The shake controls are allowing it to move just a little bit back and forth, but a lot more up and down. I'm going to increase that amount a teeny bit more to maybe 20, and I'm going to allow it to shake back and forth by 5 or so. And I'll add a little bit of rotation too. Why not? Lovely. And minus some bad roto that I would do later of Sophia, this was a fun way to take a boring moment at home, doing this little PE routine, and making it just a little bit more extraordinary. Pretty decent for a short amount of time, and I think it would do really well with a little bit of extra love. But I'm going to wrap up here with this stage of the comp, and hopefully online you'll see me share this little video later about us all dealing with staying at home as much as we can. Hopefully you are filling your time at home with as much learning as is possible. If you're a parent out there, I commend you for the tremendous amount of work that we are doing to try to get our children through this. And if you're a student either at Gnomon or anywhere else, I hope that you are taking this time to grow personally, which could be really wonderful. And speaking of that, since we're in this weird, isolated void teaching this, I would love to try to find out if any of you on Twitch have had any questions throughout and see if I can try to answer any of your questions if you've had any along the way. Were there any questions that I can address? Lovely. All right. So I think that I'm going to wind down by saying that inspiration can come from anywhere. If you're locked in your home, it may be a lot of really wonderful time to brainstorm and come up with things that you wouldn't have normally had the amount of time to think about. If you have a hectic schedule like we have found at home, it's fun to try to make light of things like this, like me taking this hour to try to make light of the situation of us trying to deal with educating and exercising the kids inside our house in rainy Los Angeles during a lovely social distancing phase. So I would love to see any of the creative work that you're putting out there. Red Giant loves to see anything that that people have created either with our tools or without. Feel free to reach out to us at Red Giant News and to check out anything that you can on Red Giant's. Sorry. Yeah, feel free to check out anything on the Red Giant tutorial page. And thank you so much, everybody.
We actually do have a question
Oh, we
from
do?
Twitch.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Someone says, have you ever tried using Nuke? There's so many layers there, it hurts to look at.
Oh, sure. I have used Nuke a little bit at DreamWorks. I think that it is a wonderful compositor, especially when you're working with live action footage and trying to put in CG elements or trying to mix in specular passes and shadows and things like that and balance them out. But I've been really married to After Effects because I was so used to working with animating layers myself. And we always found when we were at DreamWorks that if we were animating artwork created in Photoshop, especially for things like the Kung Fu Panda movies and things like that, Nuke didn't have the same capabilities and same curves and animation tools that the animators were used to working with. And so at the time, I do not know how much Nuke has evolved in this way. After Effects was a lot better for creating things from scratch, from going in with a video layer and building all the way to this point, whereas Nuke was really great for combining CG pipelines along with live action pipelines, or mixing together a bunch of CG passes into one to try to get a good result. So my real answer is I haven't played with Nuke that much because I couldn't do as much from scratch in Nuke as I can in After Effects.
Awesome. Another question is, could you please go over the key points for motion tracking one more time? Oh,
sure. So the key points for motion tracking, and this is speaking specifically to After Effects version of motion tracking. Let me minimize this for a second. So basically, motion tracking can be done in a very straightforward way in After Effects. Any clip you can throw in and just right-click and say track. Let's see, I can show you right here. Track camera under track and stabilize. And it'll think in the background and do its best to try to motion track your scene. But if there are things like characters jumping around, in this case my kids, or large sections that don't have much definition, they can be a lot harder for the motion tracker to have anything to grab onto. So a motion tracker loves a lot of parallax in your camera movement, and it loves a lot of detail in any surface that you're trying to track. So in this case, this fireplace in the background always got tracked really well, but the ground plane got lost because there wasn't actually enough info, even though I put some tracking markers on the floor. So that is why, in an effort to combat that, I first tried using a garbage mat to block out moving characters that weren't part of the static environment that's supposed to be part of the camera track, and as a secondary measure, started adding in an adjustment layer to amplify the detail in things like the floor. Just using some brightness and contrast, all of the stains and slight variations and footprints on the ground really came to light, and they became a lot of gritty surface for the camera tracker to track onto. So what I recommend doing anytime you're going to motion track a scene is try to, first of all, if you shoot in a location that has a lot of texture on the ground, that's great, you'll have better luck anyway. But if you're in a situation like this, you can try to process your image before you send it to After Effects Camera Tracker, and you'll have a lot better success.
Awesome. Another question is, other than SuperComp, what are some of your compositing go-to tools?
All right, other than SuperComp, some of my compositing go-to tools include Trapcode Particular. Trapcode Particular is this plugin that creates 3D particles that react to the scene camera. I use Particular in nearly every composite that I do. Usually in a situation like this, I will probably use Trapcode Particular in the final comp to add little smoke trails coming off of the carpet pieces that tear apart, so I can make a really custom shape of particles bursting apart or something like that, or smoke trails behind the character as he falls out of screen just to enhance his motion. Particular is a really specific plugin for adding particles to things, and in almost all visual effects sequences there are lots of particles flying around. So that's something that you'll find in almost everything that I have. Some of the other tools that I use almost every day besides SuperComp are Colorista. It's really helpful for someone like me who is colorblind. It has a very straightforward layout of where colors are and how to enhance certain colors that I'm bad at seeing. So a lot of the times when I haven't used Colorista on something, you can tell because I'll have a purple lightsaber that I thought was blue, or I'll have skin tones that are all over the place, or greens spilling into green screens that I didn't know about. But Colorista is really helpful at tamping down those specific things and removing them. Magic Bullet Looks is an amazing collection from that same suite of different movie looks and film effects that you can apply to anything that you're creating. So for example, in this, let me just add a, let's see here. All right, looks. Now what looks can do is, let me go to a fun frame maybe. So this is interesting by itself, but inside looks, it's a way of shopping a bunch of different looks for your shot in a very fast and kind of cool way. It has a ton of presets, starting with things like cool blockbuster looks that you're used to seeing in other movies, that you can just hover over and see a handful of different ways what you've shot could look. Let's see, like what did I just see there? I liked the way this looked, this classic Neo one. It kind of blended everything together in an interesting way. It's doing some interesting S-curves, it's doing some interesting stuff. It's a little bit like shopping through a bunch of LUTs. But, and in fact, you can import your favorite LUTs into this plugin. It's a really great way to just put together a straightforward comp and then really quickly find a cool, different way that it could look that is just unique. So that's one of my other favorites to use. Like, look at this filter. Just damaging the crap out of this can make it look really unique. And since people love Instagramming their photos to death, this could be a really fun way to get a unique look that maybe masks over some of the does some of the heavy lifting for your compositing work. There we go. Thank you everybody here at Gnomon for having me. Thank you everybody for watching this either live or later. I really appreciate the time and encourage you to go out and create things and find inspiration in what you do every day and take small bites like this. I love doing these because they take a short amount of time to do, but hopefully they cause a little bit, they help give a little bit of excitement or pleasure to people when they get to see them online. Doing something and giving yourself a very short amount of time to do it is possible with all of these kind of great tools out here. Motion tracking in After Effects, Red Giant tools are really wonderful for integrating them, but even just After Effects by itself is a wonderful program that you can do a million different things in. It's a workhorse program, and I think that even if you're working with computer-generated elements, you know that compositing and that last step is one of the best ways to add a lot of plus to your image. Thank you everybody so much. Thank you Gnomon. Thank you everybody online. And I've been Action Movie Dad Hashi of Red Giant.